Today, I'm joined by Melina Palmer, the Brainy Business CEO and podcast host, author, consultant, keynote speaker. Welcome to the show, Melina.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
Melina, this show is all about podcasting in professional services. Personally, I believe podcasting is the new media in sports, entertainment, politics, and even in business. Fun fact, business podcasts are the fourth biggest genre of shows. Yet there is still so much opportunity in the world of podcasting, especially in professional services. So on this show, I'm trying to elevate those voices and inspire the next wave of business podcasters. So I'd love to set the table for our listeners. Can you share a little bit about the business side of Brainy Business? Who do you help and how do you help them?
Yeah, well, it has evolved over the years in, kind of ebb and flow of things as this, happens in business, like you've said, and having been around for many years now. But really, what I do, my work is in applied behavioral economics. So it's the psychology of decision making and what I help people to do in all sorts of businesses from corporate clients that have global presence to entrepreneurs we've worked with over the years is essentially to help people understand how people really make decisions and how to communicate in a way that makes it easier for customers to buy and for employees to buy in.
So you're taking market research and behavior, all of this research that you've done and that others have done, and then applying it to businesses at scale so that consumers can make better decisions. Love that.
Yeah, and then I do training. So we do a lot of focus in where I say things have changed over the years. It used to be very like I'm getting in there and doing stuff for you, and we still do, a few projects a year, but now is really focusing on training and helping people to understand these concepts of behavioral economics and behavioral science for themselves and their teams so that they can apply them themselves. And just, one of the things I know from being in business myself, on both, in an entity and, as a vendor of sorts, over the years, that so often you hire someone to do something for you where it's like, man, we want to get better at this thing. And then you hire somebody and they like go into a room somewhere and do all the secret stuff and then come back and say, here's the plan and good luck executing that thing. Um, and what we do is more being able to have me kind of walk alongside the client to be doing some training for them so they understand those concepts and can start using them in a safe space where they can be asking me questions, getting insights into other research and things to look into as whether they're building out a study or they're looking to optimize emails for more opt-ins or anything else, really being able to help in those processes. Changing pricing is common, all sorts of things like that.
That's very interesting. So I suppose that you would work with a few different departments or organizations within your target client groups. Who do you typically work with?
Yeah, it can change, but pretty common is marketing teams can be common. Innovation, foresight type teams, market insights, and consumer research teams tend to be in that kind of experience space and going in to apply for current and future products, and also when it comes to pricing and sales teams that can come into play if someone wanted something more on the like buy-in for employees, if you have big change initiatives, whether it's like mergers or reorgs or looking to help people adopt AI and understand how that's important, how you're going to communicate to team members. That might be in an HR or other internal communication sort of team. So it can be diverse, but it's the people that really get that humans matter at the end of the day. Businesses rely on people, even as we have more AI, both in those team members and, the people that are buying your products and services are human at the end of the day. And so being able to better communicate with them and knowing that that matters can be across all sorts of areas of the organization, but those are some pretty common ones.
Very cool. So are you walking alongside those department heads, whoever's overseeing the team and helping them train their team? Or do you have a team that kind of embeds themselves and trains their team?
Yep. So we more do. So if you think about the hero's journey of
Sure.
right, so let's say our customers should always be the hero, right? So our clients,
Hmm.
they're the hero here, and we do this with our clients too, as far as picking: are you the mentor, the sidekick, or the sword, right? So you're like the tool that makes it
Oh,
possible.
okay. I like that.
In this case, where you're saying like if I was like walking alongside them and I'm like in there every day, every meeting, like really ingrained in the team. That's more like a sidekick type of a role. And we really have embodied that space of being more of the mentor that they're able to come a little bit a more helpful mentor than maybe like Dumbledore was sometimes or Gandalf, right? Where they go away
Right.
a lot and kind of leave you on your own. But it is really about those individuals have great expertise in whatever projects they're working on and being able to have a lot of things they're doing on their own. And then maybe it's, once a week or something that they're able to come in and ask questions. Someone I know has called this type of role something they're doing. I'm going to probably adopt this terminology, but I haven't done it officially yet. But calling it a professor in residence that he has
Oh, I like that.
with a company, and I like that term as far as when you think about. So I do like office hours with a lot of clients where there may be multiple team members who are learning and working on their projects. They can come in and ask questions of me at one point, but it's 5 or 10 or 12 of them that are coming in for that office hours time, and you can
Right.
learn from other team members of how they're looking to apply habits or how they're framing things differently or considering social proof in their project. And it might spur something for you, even if you're not at that point yet, and helping them to have those ripples of not just on the one project that they're working on, but really learning and building a support system as they build this habit of behavioral science and thoughtful questioning into the work that they do. So it's walking alongside them, but more in as a mentor as they're kind of doing the work on their own.
That's really cool, and I like the way that you bucketed those three categories: the mentor, the sidekick, and the sword. That you want to be operating more in that mentor capacity and making efficient use of your time with your office hours as well.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, it's important for any brand. I would say for people who are listening, if you can just pick one of those things, it tends to get really mucky when you think about like you want to be all the things to all the people. And so if you can just choose if you're one of those three things and then own that, like, and for a lot of brands, the sidekick is the right place to be. But no, the most dangerous one being the sword, that if you're going to say that you're Excalibur and you're a steak knife,
mhm.
not good. Right?
There's a big difference between Excalibur and a steak knife.
Yeah, or any sort of sword, right? If it's not Excalibur, though, it's like not
Sure.
really going to do it.
Maybe Sting. I don't know.
Yes, right. So
Uh,
we go back over
let's
to
let's keep going with the Lord of the Rings references.
right. Yeah. Make it happen.
All right, well, Melina, I'd like to shift our focus a little bit to away from the business side of the Brainy business, and now that we kind of understand what you do, who you help, let's shift our focus to the podcast. So your podcast, The Brainy Business, launched in July of 2018. Oh my goodness, my panels are falling
Whoa.
down behind me.
Amazing.
Yeah, I know.
the,
This is
the wall is like excited about what we got going on, right?
I'll fix that later. Um, but your show digs into the psychology of why people buy and to help you incorporate behavioral economics into your business, making it more brain friendly. There it goes. All right. So, Melina, what I want to ask you is why a podcast? Why not a newsletter or a blog? Those are pretty big back in 2018. Why a podcast?
Yes. Well, and I do have a newsletter, but the podcast was so way back in 2018. I was So when I found behavioral economics, I had been looking for this for 10 years and told by different universities that it didn't exist. There wasn't a program. And so I was working in industry. And by the time I finally found the field, I knew I was pretty new, right? Since I couldn't find it for a long time. And while the academic side of behavioral economics was more established, though still newer, definitely on the applied side, as I was doing my master's, realized like no one is talking about all the stuff that feels so obvious to me of how you apply this into your work, to brand messaging, to internal communication, to some of this pricing strategy, so much. And so I had left my corporate role. I was working, building a freelance marketing company, and where I was thinking I was just kind of like this would be a piece of what I did, but like underneath the marketing stuff that I was going to be doing. But over time got to see it was, more front facing, I guess, on the work that I was doing. And I went to a mastermind from a popular podcaster that they had, a dozen or less of us that were part of this kind of one day mastermind. And I remember I had said, I can see the empire at the end of the road, right? I can see
Right.
what could be built here, and I'm really excited about it. But I can also see that there are like 85 paths to get there. And I'm really not sure what the right first step is, right? Like, what's the thing that's going to be where I should put all my eggs on this in the basket, right? And what she had said to me then, she said, I never, ever tell anyone to start with a podcast because they're a lot of work and there's a lot that goes into them and much more than what people think.
Yeah.
But you need to go do this thing yesterday. Like, you should do this right now. And so I said, okay, right. And that was in mid to late May of 2018. And I, went to Google like how to podcast, right? Like, go figure it out. I didn't actually listen to a ton of podcasts at that point either. And just ended up rebranding my company, learning how and hiring an editing team, and launching with my first 3 episodes on July 6th of 2018. So within 6 weeks or so, was able to go from what the
Yeah.
heck, how does one do this, to having a show. Um, and I had told myself, that I would go for a year, that I was going to do weekly and I would never miss. I already did have a newsletter at that point. Um, but that I was going to just make sure that this was kind of the most important thing at the top of the funnel. And then I could decide if it was worth it or not. In my case, it really took off in a way that I did not expect. So we have 1.5 million almost downloads now in over 170 countries, and those came on very quickly. And so it's been, really cool in that way. As far as why I went with a podcast, to more directly answer in some of that question, it was partially just I was thinking about it as like a warm lead generator too. So in the sake of, especially in 2018, nobody knew what behavioral economics was.
Hmm.
And so to say, hey, marketing people, because that was the focus I had at the time, like, there's this thing, it's called behavioral economics. And I know that doesn't sound like something you want, but it's really important. And you absolutely should be incorporating this into your work. And you should hire consultants to help you to do that. And that person should be me.
Yeah.
Uh, is not a super awesome sales pitch. So I just figured, it was like a way that, I'm doing some public speaking, or as I'm talking to people and I want them to learn more about a particular concept, they can hear me talking about it. And it's just like, go learn about loss aversion or social proof, like, or other tips and things that could kind of complement. And so that was really the reason behind, and it did way more than I ever could have expected it to do.
And I love that. And I want to dig into that. And I love the foreshadowing here. So, first of all, you mentioned that you were pursuing speaking engagements.
Hmm.
I want to start there. So, you were pursuing speaking engagements and you viewed the podcast as a way to strengthen that speaking skill and have a point of reference to point people to say, hey, I've spoken, I have skills. Here's a podcast. You can listen to me. What impact do you think that had on you pitching yourself as a speaker in some of those speaking engagements?
Yeah, I think it's a huge piece. So I had already been speaking for several years up to that point. I have a background in musical theater and I've done improv and so like comfortable on stage too.
Okay.
So have always had that kind of background. And when I was in a corporate space, I was brought in to speak where it was like, you don't have to pay to get into the conference and they would pay for travel or whatever, but they weren't paying you to speak per se, which is fairly common when you're coming from a company, right? But I'd definitely been on stages and panels and things over the years. But when I left that corporate role, was then you make the transition of and you should also pay me money to be here and be speaking. And so I had some of those already, but in that smaller, $500 or $1,500 type speaking engagements. And so, which is great. And I did a lot of free speaking engagements, which you have to do as you're building the skill, right?
Yeah.
But just like a book, a podcast is something where people see it and go, "Oh, right," and that it does help with that credibility, especially as you have more of the social proof that goes with it of various numbers or things where you can show more people like you like this. And so, we have however many thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of downloads that people feel comfortable then making a decision. What I have found from the show that's nice over the years too is it really is the warm lead generator, but in the way of like people either they like the way I talk about the stuff and go, yeah, I get that. And I want to work with you and we'll bring you in. Or if they don't, they're just never going to call me. Right. Because like they heard the show and go, blech, that's not for me. I'm out of here. And I don't have to talk to them in the way where if we're not a fit for each other, we don't want to waste each other's time. And I haven't had to, I know, especially as you are early in business or as economies shift and things get a little bit scary, that feel like you have to force yourself to fit what they want versus who you are and that unique, kind of genius you bring into the world, whatever that happens to be. And the podcast has made it to where, like I'm laughing about silly things or even when I'm talking about, these important topics of, but, an episode on hyperbolic time discounting doesn't have to be boring. It can be fun. So, people like it and they want to have me come in or they don't, and I just don't ever hear from them. So I think that is really helpful I can just be me in that process. And it's made it that I have to do a lot less cold calling and pitching, which I appreciate because I don't know that anybody really, really loves doing that.
Maybe there are some diamonds in the rough out there who really love pounding the phones, but yeah, I hear you on that one. So I like how you described your podcast as sort of this qualification piece of your
Mm-hmm.
sales funnel, where people who listen are either they vibe with you or they don't, and they get what you're saying and they want you to help or they don't, and then they call you. And you've built it to a point where, like you mentioned, you don't need to go out and hunt for new business. There was one other point that I wanted to get to touch on with the podcast, and you mentioned that there wasn't a program around applied behavioral economics that you could find. In your bio, it says that you teach applied behavioral economics at Texas A&M University. What was the impact of the podcast in leading you down that road?
100,000,000,000%. It's because of the podcast that came to be. And so the first part where I wasn't able to find stuff, I was using wrong names for things too. I didn't call it behavioral economics because it's kind of a weird name for the field. But then
What were you
also,
calling it first? Just
I
out of
was looking at
curiosity.
like some aspects of like buying psychology and
Okay.
business psychology and in different aspects that just weren't getting me into the right departments where some of these programs existed. And there were still very few. Like, to last I checked, there still is not a school in the entire state of Washington that has a program in behavioral economics. And
Mm.
so, and that is very common. There are some universities that have amazing programs. That was also then, as I was looking for things, it's like, well, I don't want to move to North Carolina or to Pennsylvania. I have a family. Like, I can't do that. And so I was able to find an online program that I got my master's from. But there are more programs now, but it's still, there aren't as many. It's not a standard at every school by any means.
Yeah.
So early in the podcast, though, so one of the things I always did, and what I highly recommend because social proof is so important, especially for early shows, is that I would do shout outs on the
Mm-hmm.
episodes to say, hey, thanks at uh, super cool dude. Like, really appreciate that you said this thing. Like, thanks so much for the shout out. And I found super cool dude on Instagram. You should all go follow him. I've put a link in the show notes for it, like to encourage people to leave ratings and reviews, and just help get those like shout outs on the episodes. And so on one that was like episode 19, I want to say, I mean, really early, there was one, and I had said, hey, at Pool Jeff, like, thanks so much for this 5-star review. Like, awesome. I can't find you anywhere, so I can't give a link or whatever, but like, please do send me an email. Let me know, and I can give you a proper shout out. And so he emailed me, and he's the program director at the Human Behavior Lab at Texas A&M University, their behavioral economics team, and had said they loved the show and that they had all their postdocs listen to it as part of their program, that
Oh,
they were having
wow.
them listen to me teaching about behavioral concepts, as these doctoral students were coming in and doing work in the lab because they might be getting their degree in something else, and then they're having to understand the behavioral science aspects of things, which was like, that's the
That's
craziest,
super
coolest
cool.
thing I've ever heard. Like, that's amazing. And so I ended up having a conversation with them. They invited me down. I did a tour of the lab. My very first interview was with Dr. Palma, who is the head of the lab there, that I did on site there, and got to test out all the different equipment. And then we ended up talking that they had apparently wanted to start a certificate program in applied behavioral economics. And what I have heard through this was that Dr. Palma had said the only way he would want to do it is if I was going to teach it, or in it, right? And so we co-created the certificate in applied behavioral economics. I teach 6 of the classes, which is most of what's in there. On And now, over the years, where I've then had books come out of my work, I have 3 books that I've written. They are, textbooks for several of those courses. And it's cool. There are university programs around the world that still use the podcast as content for their students. And the books are textbooks, even beyond my classes, in different schools around the world, which is also fascinating and amazing and super cool, thing that you wouldn't expect to have happen. But yeah, that very much 100% my books, my TEDx, my teaching at Texas A&M, consulting with the amazing big companies I've had. No question, it all comes back to the podcast.
And you wanted to learn about a specific topic. You weren't quite sure what it was called, but you went out there and you were doing interviews and doing monologue podcast episodes and just talking about it, and then doing and engaging with your listeners. I think that's another key component of it.
Yes. And by the time I started the podcast, I was already most of the way through my master's in behavioral economics. So from before
Okay,
that,
so okay.
and that being said, as people would ask about a concept, or I came across something in my research, like, hey, I haven't heard about this thing before. Like, I'm going to go really dig in on, the endowment effect, or on familiarity bias, or pain of paying. And just like, would spend hours then researching that work, which is helpful for work I'd be doing with clients and speaking and whatever else. But to turn it into a 1 hour episode for the podcast. So the first 80 episodes of the show don't have interviews, except that one with Dr. Palma. They're all just solo episodes, and I never intended to have an interview show at all. So that evolved over time. Like, the bulk of the show from the beginning was me teaching concepts, and talking about like the top 5 wording mistakes businesses make, or the importance of lead magnets and ways that you would be applying different stuff into work. And then eventually ended up starting with interviews, and that's, the bulk of what we do now on the show. But yeah, I was learning along with people, but in a different way. I definitely already had found behavioral economics and was like, whoa, this is amazing. And so the show has always been built on that field specifically.
That's really cool. Okay. And I think that's a great segue into the evolution of your show over time. And you mentioned the first 80 episodes or so, except for one, were a monologue. And then you made the decision to bring on guests and to move away from that monologue format. A lot of podcasters, in my experience that I've talked to,
Go the other
sometimes can
way.
get a little stuck in their ways, right? It's like,
Yeah.
well, I just have an interview show. There's no way I can do a monologue episode. It's like, come
Yeah.
on, there's no rules in podcasting, right? So
Yes.
what went into that decision to transition to inviting guests onto the show? And then you mentioned that you were doing a weekly frequency. At some point, you made a switch to twice weekly. So can you
Yes.
talk about those two adjustments
Yep.
to your podcast?
Yeah. So one is like, I too have felt sort of stuck of like, but this is how I do things, and it can be a
Right.
little bit hard to make a shift. But it's worth testing and trying things out, and people are more open to shifts than you may imagine. People pay less attention to you than you think that they do. So
That's true.
funny enough, it was episode 9 is the first one that I did as a dedicated concept episode, where it was like, I'm going to teach about something like loss aversion or whatever else. And I remember I was on a walk with my husband. I was like, people are used to, like, I've always done these other things. It's going to feel like I'm teaching, and like, it's too much of a lecture. People won't like it. And what if they leave? And again, to be having the conversation for this to be episode 9, like, like nobody knew what I was doing. That's silly. But it really felt that way in the moment. And that is like, so much of the success of the show came from that transition. So I'm really glad I did that. Around episode 80, the reason I switched into doing the interviews actually is I had 3 different people that I was pitched by to have them come be guests on the show, because the show had gotten big enough with audience that it was showing up on lists and things. And so these 3 people were Roger Dooley, who is
I know
amazing.
Roger.
He wrote a book called, his new book Friction was coming out then. He also wrote a book called Brainfluence. He has a podcast on that. He writes for Forbes. He's awesome. He actually wrote the foreword for my first book. Nir Eyal, who wrote the book Hooked. He also wrote Indistractable. Also amazing, huge, super cool guy, and has done endorsements for my books. And then Scott Miller, who at that point was the EVP of Thought Leadership at Franklin Covey. And so within a week, I think these 3 pitches all came into me. And it's like, feels like I should at least try it with these, right? But at that point, I said, but I can only do, 1 a month, like, and I have to really space these out in between the solo episodes. And then as more came in, it's like, okay, so it's 1 and then 2 solo episodes, and then it's like every other one. And, over time, it's evolved to be pretty much exclusively that new episodes or interviews. When my second book came out, we started a process of refreshing an old episode during the week, and I do a new intro outro for it. And so that's where now, like, at that point, it was about 225 episodes of the show. Now we have almost 500 episodes. And as people go in, like there's a lot of stuff in the middle that people don't know exists when you're new
Yeah.
and finding the show, right? And so to refresh an episode on scarcity or on partitioning or whatever, people are like, cool, what's this thing? And it's a nice balance of, so those solo episodes, they do take a lot more work. And I have to read other
Yeah, they
people's
do.
books and things, but like writing a script and doing all of that, I would spend 8 to 10 hours per episode doing that.
Oh,
And
wow.
that's not doing my own editing. So like editing is not included in that.
No, this is
The
just the
social media
research.
and like all of that, just to research, write, record
Yep.
is about 8 or 10 hours per
People don't
episode.
understand how much goes into monologue episodes, and it's funny. I interviewed Ross Simmons, who create once, distribute forever. Are you familiar with that mantra?
Mm-hmm.
He's a marketing consultant, and his podcast, Create Like the Greats. He mentioned that he pours so much into those monologue episodes, and then that becomes a flywheel that he can redistribute. That's his whole thing.
Yeah.
But I think listeners may have this misconception that you just hook up a mic, hit record, and then flow.
Well, I mean, you can. It doesn't mean anyone's going to listen to it,
Nah,
though.
that's a good
right?
point.
So, like,
Yeah.
a podcast is as easy as you would want it to be, right? So, but like, beware where people will pitch you on the idea of like, in just 1 hour a month, you can have a weekly show. Like, no, you can't. I
Yeah.
mean, you can, but like the likelihood that it's going to actually do anything for you is very, very low. So advice I always give to people, and I'm guessing you have kind of similar here, being like, so when I did the podcast, said like, this is the most important thing. Like I said, I will never, ever miss. And it's the top of my funnel and I have to make it good. I'm investing in the audio quality and paying for editing from episode 1 and paid for someone to teach me how to do it, make sure I had the right microphone and different equipment because audio quality really matters. And like, I'm going to just like dedicate everything to this. And if I don't have the space to do the newsletter that week, or there's something else that can't happen, those can adjust while this is the top focus if I'm not going to be as active on Twitter or whatever else at that point, right? And that's okay to make this thing really work. But don't get distracted by all the shiny objects of saying like, I'm going to do a podcast and a blog and a newsletter and be on Twitter and Instagram and TikTok, and I'm going to do LinkedIn and I'm going to do YouTube. And now we have to do shorts. Like, if you try to do all of those, they're all going to be bad. So do one and do it well. And once that becomes a habit, you can add in the next one thing that you can layer in. But if you try to do it all, it's just not going to be worth it.
It's like rings on a tree. It's
Right.
like rings on a tree. You just got to
Yeah.
do one at a time and expand from there.
Yeah, I love that.
Melina, thank you so much for your time today, sharing your podcasting journey with me. So if folks want to go and check out any sort of behavioral economics, any topic related to behavioral economics, go check out the Brainy Business podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. And Melina, if people want to connect with you and find you online, where can they go?
Thank you for asking. So the podcast, my books, consulting, speaking, any of that, go to thebrainybusiness.com. It's all there. And then also you can find me on all the socials as the Brainy Biz, BIZ, and Melina Palmer on LinkedIn.
Excellent. Thank you, Melina.
Yep. Thanks for having me.